The sky was the color of burned iron, streaked with the scars of orbital bombardment that had long since cooled. Ash drifted like snow, clinging to the shattered ceramite of armor that no longer gleamed, no longer bore heraldry. Once this had been a war zone of purpose, a crusade world marked for reclamation in the Emperor's name. Now it was nothing but a tomb, and the warriors who still breathed upon its surface were prisoners of memory. Brother Captain Ilian stood upon a ridge of blackened glass, the wind howling through the fractures in his helm. Below, the ruins of their drop sites spread in a broken circle, the skeletal remains of thunderhawks, shattered rhino hulls, and the half-buried bodies of their fallen kin. The vox crackled softly in his ear, a meaningless pulse of static that once carried the voice of command. He adjusted the dial out of habit, knowing it would change nothing. For years now, no one had answered. Their chapter had come here with faith blazing, the banners of the Emperor carried high, their hearts lit by the promise of conquest. A Xenos infestation, the command had said, a routine cleansing. But the infestation had not been routine, nor the world ordinary. It devoured men and metal alike, a planet-wide organism that thrived on death and decay. When the orbital bombardment began, it had consumed everything, including their fleet. The Imperium had assumed the surface lost, and so they left. 100 space marines had survived the firestorm. Decades later, fewer than a dozen remained. In the silence between the howling winds, Ilian could still hear them, the voices of his brothers reciting the litany of endurance, the rhythmic clatter of bolter drills conducted under crimson dawns. They had built a fortress of scrap and oath, a bastion against despair. It stood now as a ruin within the ruin, its walls of fused armor plate covered in dust and scripture. The words had been carved into metal by the knives of fallen brothers. We endure for the Emperor. We endure for the dawn that never comes. Brother Vargo tended to the fires each dusk. His armor was cracked and fused at the joints. The blue of his chapter dulled to a greyish hue. He spoke less with each passing cycle, his voice rasping through a damaged vox grill like an old machine's whisper. "Signal check," he would mutter, tapping the side of his helm, though they all knew no signal would come. It had become ritual, a rite of persistence. Perhaps that was all faith truly was. Repetition in the face of futility. Ilian moved through the encampment, his steps heavy, his mind circling the same prayer he had spoken since the bombardment ceased. "Emperor, guide our purpose. Let our watch not be in vain." He no longer remembered when he had last received communion from a chaplain. Their chaplain, Brother Seraph, had perished 3 years after the silence, found kneeling before the burnt remains of the chapter banner, his heart pierced by his own Crozius Arcanum. His death had been called martyrdom at first. Later, it was simply called release at night, when the second sun of the world sank beneath the horizon. The temperature dropped so swiftly that even the internal heaters of their power armor struggled to keep pace. The sand turned to frost, the air to mist, and in that mist, shapes would sometimes move. Shadows of armor, spectral echoes that mirrored their own patrols. Some swore they saw the fallen walking beside them, wordless and watchful. Others dismissed it as the mind's rebellion against isolation. But none spoke of it aloud for long. To name the ghosts was to invite them closer. They had tried to leave once. A half-functioning Thunderhawk had been salvaged and repaired across 10 painstaking years. They had prayed over every component, replaced circuits with scraps of relics, whispered the rites of ignition as if each syllable might bring divine favor. The machine had roared to life for one glorious minute before its core imploded, taking 3 brothers with it. Since then, the sky had become sacred, not as freedom, but as punishment. There were times when Ilian would stand atop the bastion's highest point, and imagine he could still see the Emperor's light beyond the clouds, a faint shimmer that might one day guide them home. But as the centuries wore on, even that illusion dimmed. He began to wonder if the Astronomicon still burned, or if they had been cast adrift outside its reach, forgotten by both man and God. The thought was heresy, but heresy loses its sting when there are no witnesses left to condemn you. On the 73rd year after the silence, Brother Cale fell. His armor had long been fused into his flesh, his blood a slow trickle of nutrient gel and machine oil. During a routine patrol of the perimeter, he simply stopped walking, gazed into the horizon, and said through his vox, "I can hear them calling." When the others reached him, his eyes were dark, his heart silent. They buried him beneath the old landing site, planting his bolt pistol upright in the soil as a marker. It was the last grave they'd dug. By then, Ilian had stopped counting the days. Time had become circular. Sunrise, patrol, maintenance, watch, silence. The rites had outlived their meaning, yet he could not abandon them. Without ritual, there was nothing. So he maintained his bolter, recited the catechisms of purity, even though the weapon's machine spirit had long since fallen dormant. He cleaned his armor, polished the aquila across his chest, though the wings were chipped and faded. These actions tethered him to what he had been. An astartes, a servant of the Emperor, a guardian of humanity, even if humanity itself had forgotten him. One dusk, as the wind howled over the dunes, Vargo approached with a cracked data slate he had found half buried in the sand. It flickered to life under his gauntlet, displaying a fragment of a transmission. A voice, human, imperial, real. It spoke only a few garbled words before fading. Survivors, coordinates.
Emperor protect, then static.
The sound was like a thunderclap after years of silence. The brothers gathered around the slate, their breaths heavy with hope they did not dare to name. Could it be another detachment? A distress call from a nearby world? Or merely an echo, a relic transmission caught in the ion storms that circled the planet like ghosts?
We must find the source, Vargo said.
His eyes, bloodshot and hollow, burned with something long dormant. Purpose. Ilian wanted to agree, to give his brothers one last mission. But deep within he felt the truth. The signal was not salvation. It was memory. A phantom cast by the machine spirits of a dead world. Still he nodded. Prepare for march at dawn. That night, Ilian stood alone beneath the fractured stars. The wind hissed through the wreckage like the whisper of old prayers. He wondered if this was how the end truly came, not in the fire of battle, but in the slow decay of remembrance. The Emperor had once called them his angels. Perhaps angels were not meant to live forever. As the first pale light touched the horizon, the survivors began their march across the ash plains. The sound of ceramite grinding against stone echoing like a dirge. Behind them the bastion burned. Vargo had set it aflame as a funeral pyre for their forgotten. The smoke rose like incense to the heavens, and for a fleeting moment, Ilian thought he saw the shape of wings in the drifting embers. They would walk until their armor failed, until their lungs turned to dust, until faith itself gave way to silence. And perhaps then, at the edge of oblivion, they would find what they had been searching for. Not rescue, but meaning in their abandonment. The plains stretched for endless leagues, a horizon of black sand and twisted metal where even the wind seemed tired of moving. For 3 months, or perhaps 3 years by the world's broken measure, Ilian and his remaining brothers marched. The coordinates retrieved from the corrupted data slate had led them through salt dunes that whispered like dying lungs, across valleys littered with the bones of long extinct beasts, until the world itself seemed to watch them with eyes of rust and dust. Their destination revealed itself not as salvation, but as a memory, a manufactorum, vast and half-buried beneath the planet's skin. The mountain-sized structure jutted from the earth like the spine of some dead god, its adamantine plating corroded and its machine spirits long silent. Columns of vapor hissed from fissures along its flank, and the air was choked with the metallic tang of oxidized blood and oil. "Emperor's grace," Vargo murmured through his vox, his voice crackling like static caught in prayer. "It still stands," Ilian said nothing. Hope was a poison best taken in small doses, yet even he felt something stir as the towering gates loomed ahead, carved with the faded sigil of the adeptus mechanicus, the imperial cog entwined with the half-seen aquila. Once this place had produced weapons for the Imperium, sanctified under the Omnissiah's gaze. Now it was a corpse, and like all corpses, it might still whisper secrets to those desperate enough to listen. They breached the gates at dawn, their servos groaning in protest.
Inside, the air was heavy with age.
Rows of assembly lines stretched into darkness, their skeletal frames covered in dust and webbing. Here and there lights flickered, faint, sickly glows that pulsed like dying hearts. The first sound they heard was the distant rhythmic clicking of gears. It echoed through the chamber like the beating of a machine struggling to remember how to live. Brother Siran knelt beside a dormant servitor slumped against a wall, its flesh mummified, its mechanical limbs fused by corrosion. A faded mechanicus symbol was stamped into its skull. "They left them," Siran muttered.
"Even their creations." "They leave everything eventually," Ilian replied.
"Even us." They moved deeper into the complex, guided by faint energy readings from their armor sensors. The corridors narrowed, descending into a labyrinth of forgotten industry, conveyor belts draped in silence, maintenance drones fossilized in motion, cogitator screens flickering with half-sentences of binary prayer. Somewhere within this metal grave, something still lived. It was Vargo who found it. In a hall that might once have been an assembly chamber, a column of light pulsed from a cracked data core embedded in the floor. Around it, ancient servitors shuffled in endless circles, their flesh long decayed, their metal frames operating on rote subroutines. They chanted in broken vox tones a static hymn that repeated the same 4 words endlessly. "Blessed be the machine." The sight drew a chill through Ilian's augmetics. These creatures had been abandoned for centuries, their organic parts dead, their circuitry looping through eternal devotion to a forgotten master. They were, in their way, reflections of the astartes themselves, beings sustained by purpose long after purpose had died. "Can we access it?" Vargo asked, gesturing toward the data core. Siran moved to kneel beside it, his gauntlets scraping across the dust.
"Perhaps."
"The systems are degraded, but the machine spirit, it still flickers." He began the litany of connection, his voice low and reverent. For a moment, the core's light brightened, flickering in response to the old canticles. Then, with a grinding groan, it spoke. The voice that emerged was distorted beyond recognition, a chorus of machine tones and human echoes, as if countless memories spoke through one dying conduit. Our production quota?
700 years overdue. Requisition. Astra Militarum supply. Emperor protect!
Then came the sound of laughter. Not human, not mechanical. Something in between, a glitch of sanity that twisted the air. The lights in the hall brightened, revealing hundreds of dormant servitors hanging from the ceiling like metallic fruit. Their eyes glowed red for the first time in centuries. "They are awakening," Siran warned. The servitors began to move, their limbs twitching, their decayed flesh creaking like rotted leather. They descended from their mounts, each carrying rusted tools or fragments of weaponry. But they did not attack. Instead, they formed ranks facing the astartes, their dead lips moving in broken unison. Input directive. Input directive? Ilian stepped forward. You serve the Imperium still, he said. His voice echoed through the chamber like command made flesh. We are your masters. You will obey. For a moment's silence. Then, as if guided by recognition buried deep in their programming, the servitors bowed. A strange reverence filled the air. The surviving Space Marines had not commanded obedience in centuries. To be obeyed, even by dead machines, was intoxicating. Vargo turned toward Ilian. We could rebuild this place. Forge supplies, weapons, armor, we could endure. Endure, Ilian echoed softly. The word had become both their salvation and their curse. Over the following months, the manufactorum became their cathedral. They repaired what they could, learning the rhythms of the machines, whispering the old litanies like priests of iron. The servitors obeyed without question, restoring power lines, cleaning debris, resurrecting the echo of productivity. The hum of generators returned, faint but constant, and for the first time in generations, the air was warm. But warmth can deceive. The machine spirit of the manufactorum was not benevolent. It began to change its hymns, subtle at first, new phrases embedded in the servitors' chants, words none of them remembered teaching. Flesh obeys machine. Machine remembers command. The meaning was uncertain, but its rhythm seeped into their dreams. Siran was the first to change. During maintenance one night, he removed his gauntlet and pressed his bare hand against a power conduit. The jolt burned through his flesh, but he did not flinch.
It speaks, he whispered.
It remembers us. It knows our purpose. After that, he began to modify himself. Minor augmetics at first, scavenged from the servitors, then deeper implants. His voice took on the stuttering tone of a vox filter, his prayers filled with binary fragments. Ilian tried to stop him, but Seran only smiled through the distortion. We serve the Omnissiah as we serve the Emperor. Perhaps they are one and the same. Vargo grew uneasy. He blasphemes, he said. We are warriors, not priests of the machine. But Ilian hesitated. He saw in Seran's madness a kind of peace, the same peace he himself had sought for years. Perhaps obedience to the machine was no worse than obedience to silence. Perhaps this was simply another way of remembering. When Seran finally disappeared into the depths of the manufactorum, they did not follow. Days later, the servitors began chanting his name as part of their liturgy. Seran the conduit, Seran the unbroken. By the time Ilian realized the truth, that the manufactorum was not reviving them, but consuming them, it was too late. The lines between man and machine had already blurred. His armor would no longer disengage. The servos responded to commands he did not give. The walls hummed with his own heartbeat. The machine had not forgotten them after all. It had simply been waiting. That night, as Vargo lay dying from coolant poisoning, Ilian knelt beside him.
It will not end, Vargo rasped.
We are becoming something else. Yes, Ilian said softly. Something the Imperium will never claim. Something it will never remember. And as the manufactorum's lights flickered to life one by one, illuminating the endless ranks of servitors now moving in perfect synchronization, Ilian understood the cruel mercy of the Emperor's silence. Some legacies were not erased. They were repurposed. The machine had not forgotten them. It had absorbed them. The years that followed were swallowed by ritual. The manufactorum had become their tomb, but it was a tomb that breathed. Every corridor echoed with the hum of servitors, every chamber thrummed with the rhythm of half-living machinery. For a time, Ilian convinced himself this was victory. The forges burned again.
Ammunition was fabricated.
Ceramite plates were reforged and sanctified in oil and ash. They had, in a way, rebuilt the wall. Yet beneath the order, something was unraveling. Vargo's death had left only 3 of them: Ilian, brother Kador, and what was left of Saran. Kador was the youngest among them, a warrior of unbending discipline who still recited the Codex Astartes each dawn.
Even when his voice trembled with exhaustion,
He kept count of the days with knife scratches upon the wall. When Ilian asked him why, he said, "Because someone must remember the time." But time no longer obeyed them. The sun above the world had grown dimmer, filtered through centuries of ash storms. Sometimes it remained fixed upon the horizon for weeks. Other times it vanished entirely, leaving them in an unbroken twilight. The planet itself seemed to pulse with the same erratic heartbeat as the forges they had revived. Saran no longer resembled his brothers. His armor had fused into his body completely, cables spilling from beneath his pauldrons like veins of copper. His eyes had become twin lenses that flickered with data streams. He moved through the halls, whispering binary prayers, his voice layered with static and reverence. The servitors followed him as if he were a magos reborn. Kador despised him. "He has forsaken the Emperor," he said one evening, sharpening his combat blade by the dim glow of a lumen strip. "He worships machines and calls it faith." "He endures," Ilian replied. "Perhaps endurance is all that's left to us." "Endurance without faith is corruption," Kador hissed. "He's not our brother anymore." But even as Kador spoke, Ilian wondered what brother truly meant now. They were bound by oath, yet fractured by time and silence. Their chapter was dust. Their names would never be recorded in the halls of remembrance. If brotherhood existed only in memory, then perhaps it had already died. One day, Ilian awoke to the sound of chanting echoing through the manufactorum. The tone was familiar yet alien, rhythmic, metallic, fervent. He followed the sound through the lower corridors until he reached the central forge chamber. There, hundreds of servitors stood arranged in concentric circles, their voices merged into a single mechanical hymn. At the center stood Saran, surrounded by coils of lightning. He raised his arms as though addressing a congregation. "The machine remembers," he intoned. "The Emperor sleeps, but the Omnissiah wakes. Through steel we are purified. Through silence we are made whole." The words struck Ilian like a hammer. Once such heresy would have demanded execution. Now it only filled him with quiet dread, not because it was false, but because it might be true. The Emperor had been silent for generations. The machine, at least, still answered. Kador appeared beside him, his bolter trembling in his grasp. "We end this now." Before Ilian could stop him, Kador stepped into the chamber and fired. The shot tore through Saran's chestplate, sparks scattering like sacred fire. The servitors shrieked in distorted vox tones, surging forward as one metallic wave. Kador's second shot took down another, but the horde was upon him in seconds. He vanished beneath the tide of steel and wire. Ilian waded in after him, his power sword roaring to life. The air filled with the scent of burning oil and flesh as he cleaved through servitors by the dozen. But for every one that fell, another rose animated by some unseen will. Through the chaos, Saran still stood, his wound smoking but his voice unwavering. "Do you not see, brother?" he called, the binary overlay in his tone crackling like divine static. "The Emperor's silence is not abandonment. It is ascension. He has become the machine, and we..." The blade struck before he could finish. Ilian drove his sword through Saran's chest, piercing the circuitry beneath. Sparks cascaded across the floor. The servitors froze mid-motion, their red eyes flickering out one by one. Then came the sound, a deep, mournful hum that seemed to echo from the planet's core. The forges dimmed. The light died. Ilian fell to his knees, surrounded by the still bodies of both machine and man. His armor was slick with coolant and blood. Cador's remains lay crumpled against a wall, his helm crushed, his bolter silent. Siran's body twitched once, then stilled completely. The silence that followed was absolute, for days, or perhaps longer. Ilian wandered the empty halls. The manufactorum had gone dark again, its machine spirits retreating into slumber. The faint hum of life support faltered. He could feel his armor cooling against his skin, its power reserves dwindling. His every step echoed like a sermon in an empty cathedral. He found himself speaking aloud, if only to hear a voice. "We have failed," he said to no one. "But we have also endured. What greater sacrifice can there be?" His words were met by silence, and he realized that silence had become his truest brother. It did not judge, did not question, did not promise salvation it could not deliver. It simply was. Sometimes, as he drifted through the shadowed corridors, he imagined he could still hear Cador's voice reciting battle prayers, or Siran whispering binary hymns from the vents. The line between memory and hallucination blurred.
Perhaps they were not gone at all.
Perhaps their echoes had become part of the machine. One night, if night still meant anything, Ilian climbed to the highest spire of the manufactorum. The sky was aflame with auroras, streaks of green and crimson that rippled like open wounds across the heavens. From this height he could see the full expanse of the wasteland, stretching beyond sight, a graveyard world beneath an indifferent sky. He knelt, resting his gauntlet on the cold metal. His armor's power core pulsed weakly. His breath fogged the inside of his helm. "We are the Emperor's sons," he whispered, "and even forgotten sons still bleed in his name." The wind carried no answer. Yet somewhere in that silence he felt a strange peace. Not the peace of victory, but of surrender. The war was over, but his purpose remained. To remember, to bear witness, to stand until even standing became impossible. Below, deep within the manufactorum, a faint hum returned. The machines stirred again, slowly, like sleepers dreaming of purpose. But their voices no longer sang of the Omnissiah. They repeated one phrase endlessly in distorted vox. "The brother endures." Perhaps that was how faith survived. Not in glory, not in triumph, but in the refusal to vanish completely. Ilian rose, gazing toward the horizon where the aurora burned brightest. Somewhere beyond that dying sky lay Terra, the throne, the dream of humanity. He no longer knew if it still existed, but that did not matter. The Emperor had taught them duty. The machine had taught them endurance. And between those truths lay the silence that had become his only companion. The brotherhood was gone. The war was gone. But the silence remained, vast, patient, eternal. And in that silence, the last space marine began to walk again. The silence after death is never truly empty. It lingers, alive in the cold metal bones of a dying world. Long after Brother Sergeant Corvain and his warriors fell, the ruins of the shrine remained untouched, preserved in eerie perfection as though the universe itself hesitated to disturb their sacrifice. Centuries passed like moments, and the planet became a tomb world not of Necron design, but of human defiance, its surface a scab of forgotten faith beneath an uncaring cosmos. Yet deep within the stone and dust, where machine and memory blurred, something endured. It began as a faint hum, like the echo of a prayer caught in static. Then, within the shell of Corvain's ruined armor, a spark of data flickered to life. His armor's machine spirit had not fully died. The rites of the Omnissiah, performed countless times during his life, had left imprints, ritual circuits that clung to existence with stubborn will. It replayed fragments of his final moments, looping the sound of his voice, his heartbeat, his vow. The air was dry and still, but the fragments persisted. For him, always, it repeated in a broken, digitized tone. The words crawled across, the data slate of a nearby servitor husk, then into the ruined vox relays of the manufactorum, and from there into the planetary grid that the Necrons had left dormant. The words spread like infection, like prayer, like fire in vacuum. Elsewhere, beneath the sands, something ancient stirred. The Necrons had long since departed, their mission concluded, their logic uninterested in organic remains. Yet their technology was not idle. Deep in the planet's core, their networked architecture still pulsed, calculating, observing, analyzing the resonance that now drifted across frequencies. The corrupted signal, half prayer, half machine code, began to rewrite subroutines. Fragments of human liturgy merged with alien algorithms, forming a strange hybrid hymn. Some of the lesser constructs began to twitch in their alcoves, movements hesitant and confused, as though hearing a language they had once known in a dream. In orbit, a derelict ship drifted, a patrol vessel of the Astra Militarum, long declared lost to warp interference. Its automated auspex detected the surge below. Within its decaying cogitators, an ancient failsafe triggered. A distress beacon lit up, broadcasting into the void. The message was simple, ancient, and untraceable to any current registry. Imperial survivors detected. Code Sigma Oblivion. The signal cut through the void, across the warp, and brushed against the edge of the Astronomican's light. Weeks later, or perhaps centuries, for time was fragile here, a vessel responded. It bore no markings of the Imperial Navy, no crest of the adeptus mechanicus. It was golden, radiant, and silent. The custodian ship descended not in haste, but with ceremony. From its hull shone the sigil of the Aquila, wrought in living gold. The custodes had come, not to save, but to witness. Among them was Shield Captain Lycander, a being more statue than man, his presence a quiet storm of divinity and judgment. When he stepped onto the surface, the air around him shimmered with restrained power. He walked through the ruins without a word, his guardians behind him, each a living relic of the Emperor's perfect design. The dead Space Marines lay where? They had fallen, untouched by time, their armor strangely preserved. Lycander knelt before Corvain's body and brushed the dust away from the broken Aquila on his chest plate. For a long moment he did not move. The silence stretched until one of the lesser custodians finally spoke. "Why here, my captain? There are no survivors." "There is something," Lycander replied, his voice low, resonant, edged with reverence. "Something that calls." The custodians activated their auspex arrays. The readings were impossible. The planetary core emitted a low-frequency hum that matched the harmonic patterns of high Gothic chant. The words "for him" always appeared repeatedly in the machine code. The servitors twitched to half-life, their mouths opening and closing in unison, whispering the same phrase. It was not speech, it was ritual. Lycander ordered a descent into the catacombs below the manufactorum. They moved through corridors where shadows danced like spirits trapped between flesh and metal. The deeper they went, the stronger the hum became, until the very stones seemed to vibrate with the rhythm of devotion. At the heart of the labyrinth, they found it, a fusion of machine and corpse, a throne of bones wrapped in data cables and prayer scrolls. Corvain's body had become its core, fused to the remains of the shrine's generator. His eyes glowed faintly, not alive, not dead, but aware. One of the custodians reached forward, hand trembling despite centuries of conditioning. "Is it possible?" he whispered. Lykander's gaze did not waver. "No," he said, though his tone betrayed uncertainty. "And yet," the thing spoke. Not through lips, but through the air itself, vibrating through vox static and machine hum. "We are not lost," it said, in a voice that was both Corvain's and countless others. "We endure in service. We endure in faith." The custodians stood frozen. Even the machine spirits of their armor trembled beneath the weight of it. To hear words so saturated with devotion, emanating from circuitry, from death, was a blasphemy and a miracle entwined. Lykander drew closer. "By whose will do you endure?" The reply was instant, echoing through the halls. "By his light, by his absence, by the memory of what he was." The ship's sensors above began to flicker wildly. The Astronomican's faint pulse grew stronger for a heartbeat, as if responding to the resonance below. The custodian's lenses filled with static, images flashing, golden spires, burning skies, the Emperor's face seen through a veil of fire. Then it was gone, leaving only silence and the sound of their own breath. Lykander turned away from the throne, his expression unreadable. "Seal it!" he commanded. "No one must know!" "But, Captain," one protested softly, "what if this is a sign? What if he—" "Enough." Lykander's tone cut like a blade. "The Emperor does not return in circuits and ash. We will not mistake the echo for the source." They departed soon after, leaving the catacombs sealed once more. Yet, as their ship ascended into the void, the hum continued. It spread again, fainter now, carried through the data streams of the planet's lifeless networks, through the warp echoes of the custodian vessel itself, and somewhere, in the immeasurable gulf of the Imperium, something vast and unseen shifted, like a sleeper turning in its dream. Down below, in the tomb of forgotten warriors, the fusion of man and machine whispered once more into the dark. For him, always. The words became a pulse, a rhythm that merged with the heartbeat of the planet itself. In the cold silence between stars, faith had found a new vessel, one neither living nor dead, neither flesh nor divine. And in that silence, the universe listened. The void was vast, but it was not empty. It trembled with secrets, with echoes of prayers that had long outlasted the throats that spoke them. The custodian vessel, silent and golden, drifted through that darkness carrying more than its passengers realized. The hum from the dead world below had imprinted itself upon the ship's systems, a rhythm too faint to measure, too constant to ignore. Lykander could hear it when the corridors were still, a heartbeat that did not belong to any living thing.
"For him."
Always. The words whispered through the metal, faint and persistent, like memory refusing to die. He told himself it was residual data interference, a remnant of the corrupted vox they had encountered. Yet sometimes, when the light dimmed across the sanctum decks, he swore he could hear something beneath the hum, a voice so low and so vast that it seemed to vibrate through his bones rather than his ears. He sought counsel in solitude. The custodes were not meant to doubt. They were the Emperor's perfect guardians, unflinching and unwavering. But even perfection can crack beneath the weight of silence. In his private quarters, surrounded by relics from 1,000 campaigns, Lykander knelt before the hololithic projection of the Emperor's throne. The golden figure shimmered faintly, a simulation generated from the archives of holy terror. "Father of all," he whispered, "I have seen faith take root in metal and code. I have seen death defy its name.
"Tell me, what is your will in this?"
The projection gave no answer, only light and stillness. Yet in that stillness the hum grew louder. It was no longer just the echo of Corvain's vow. It was layered now, countless voices joining it, as though faith itself was spreading through the ship's machine spirits. One of the custodians reported that the ship's systems were responding to non-existent commands, opening sealed data vaults, rerouting power toward the central shrine. Another swore that during his watch he saw a faint golden figure standing beside the reliquary chamber, a silhouette that dissolved the moment it was approached. Lykander ordered silence. No one was to speak of it, not to each other, not in prayer, not in thought. But the seed of wonder had already been planted. Warriors who had never known fear or hesitation now found themselves pausing at the sound of the unseen voice. The phrase repeated in their dreams, in the cadence of their marching, in the quiet hum of their armor's servos. For him, always. When they reached the edge of Imperial space, the ship's astropath, ancient and blind, reported an anomaly in the warp. The Astronomicon pulsed irregularly like a heartbeat skipping in pain. Yet within that distortion, she heard something new. A choir, faint but real, a song that mirrored the rhythm she had heard within the ship itself. She fell to her knees and wept, murmuring the same words the dead world had spoken. He's not silent. He dreams through the faithful. Lykander stood at the viewport, watching the infinite swirl of the warp beyond. He thought of Corvain, of the man who had fought in isolation, who had died in silence, who had become the echo that now haunted the stars. Was this corruption or miracle?
Blasphemy or proof?
The lines had blurred long ago, and Lykander found himself afraid, not of the unknown, but of what it might mean if it were true. For if the Emperor could speak through machines and corpses, then perhaps he had never truly needed the living at all. He summoned his custodes to the sanctum deck. The light there was strange, softer, almost alive, golden without source. The ship's systems had reconfigured themselves, forming an altar of luminous metal and data streams. At its center hovered a sphere of energy, flickering between gold and white, pulsing to the same eternal rhythm. The custodians stood in awe, silent in the face of something beyond doctrine. "What is it?" one whispered. "The memory of faith," Lykander said. His voice trembled. "Or its beginning." As they watched, images began to form within the light, the fallen marines of the forgotten world, rising again in echoes of gold. Their armor restored, their faces serene, their weapons no longer of war, but of flame and song. It was not resurrection in the physical sense, but something higher, an imprint of devotion given form. The Emperor's face appeared within the radiance, not as flesh, but as presence. Every man who looked upon it felt as though he were being seen in return. Some fell to their knees. Others wept openly, abandoning the restraint bred into them since creation. For a moment that defied reason, time, and law, they felt what humanity had not felt in millennia: warmth. Then, just as quickly, the light began to fade. The hum grew faint again, the sphere collapsing into itself like a dying star. One by one, the systems of the ship fell silent. The custodians stood still, listening to the last whisper that drifted through the air, the same phrase that had haunted them since the tomb world. "We endure in service. We endure in faith, for him, always." When the light was gone, Lykander turned to his men. "No record," he said softly. "This will not be entered into the archives. It will be carried only in the soul." They obeyed. The ship altered course for Terra, silent and unmarked. But within its heart, the machine spirit still whispered. Even the Emperor's simulacrum on the hololith flickered once more, before going still,
as if acknowledging what had transpired. When they reached the Sol system,
the golden throne awaited, unchanged and eternal. Lykander disembarked, carrying with him the relic of the lost world, a single shard of Corvain's armor fused with data fragments that no tech priest could decipher. He placed it before the Sanctum Imperialis, where only the most sacred relics were allowed. No one asked where it had come from. The custodes who accompanied him remained silent, bound by awe and fear alike. That night, within the great stillness of the throne chamber, as the Emperor's mortal shell sat unmoving upon his seat of divinity, a single flicker of gold passed across the ruined machinery surrounding him. The servitors maintaining the life-sustaining systems paused. The air shimmered faintly, and for a heartbeat, a voice older than time murmured through the vox lines, inaudible to all but the faithful who listened with their souls. For him.
Always. The words travelled through the sanctum, through the corridors of the palace, through the minds of the few who could still dream of light without madness.
Somewhere deep within the labyrinth of machines that sustained his form, something ancient stirred, not awakening, not returning, but remembering. In the farthest corner of the galaxy, the dead world still glowed faintly beneath its dust. The shrine was gone, the surface glassed and silent. Yet under the rock and silence the hum endured, eternal as devotion itself. Across 1,000 systems, across the cold void where no man prayed, the same pulse echoed, a signal too faint for instruments, too strong to die. Faith had transcended flesh. Devotion had found a new voice, and in the endless dark, where empires burned and gods bled, something vast and unseen smiled, not in triumph, not in mercy, but in acknowledgement. The Emperor did not speak, but he was listening, and across the stars, the forgotten vow of one lost warrior became the quiet heartbeat of mankind's enduring spirit. For him, always.